12. Argo had only briefly met Kismel before the 4th floor boss fight, so it was more or less her first real encounter with the Dark Elf. But after interacting with other high-functioning AI NPCs like Maya, Theano, Nanir, and Kyo, she welcomed the guest and took her presence in stride. Even still, the rat was surprised that Kismel, a companion NPC from the Elf War campaign quest, agreed to help with the totally unrelated task of gathering wurtstones. She kept looking over at Asana and the Dark Elf Knight, who were chatting happily as we searched for stones in the wide riverbed, and murmured things to herself like, and, well. I wanted to believe that it wasn't because she was getting some wicked ideas, like using Kismel as a tool to gain more experience points. As for the wurtstones, they were little black rocks, less than an inch in size. They had a particular metallic shine to them. I had to agree that it would be extremely inefficient to try to search for them in the middle of the night. On top of that, there were faux wurtz pieces that looked the same except for the lack of that shine. Plus, river crabs that appeared identical in color and texture until they snipped at your fingers with their claws just to make things that much more annoying. Regardless, Argo had already found over 20, so with the 4 of us together, it took less than an hour to reach the necessary total. Once our quest log had updated properly, Argo took out some bottled fruit juice from her inventory to celebrate, and we headed directly east into Volupta. As she did when going into Stachin on the floor below, Kismel wore a dark hooded cloak that hid her face and her armor. I was a bit nervous when we passed through the gate, but the NPC guards showed no sign of suspicion when we went through. The west gate of Volupta was actually on the northwest corner of the city because it had been built along the waterline. The white buildings and roofs were visible the instant you walked through the gate. Kismel came to a stop in a small open space and simply observed for a moment. "This is a beautiful place," she murmured. "Stachin had too many squares for my liking, but I would enjoy staying in this town for a time, I think. Is that the sea to the south?" I wasn't quite sure how to answer that. Well, since it's part of Einkrad, I don't think you can call it a sea exactly, but it's salt water. "Then, most likely, this land was carved off the coastline when the Great Separation occurred," she said. "Oh," exclaimed Asana. "Of course that's right. Then maybe there's a floor that's just like one little island that would leave the majority of it as sea." Logically speaking, that was sound. I was impressed by Asana's power of imagination. That would make beating it really easy. I mean, once you leave the main town, the labyrinth tower's got to be right in front of you, huh? Asana and Kismel both sighed with exasperation, and Argo just shook her head. I cleared my throat awkwardly and tried to save face by changing the topic. Yeah, if we get our hands on a pass, we should take Kismel to the beach too. You've never been to the ocean, have you?" "No, of course not. But what do you mean by a pass?" the knight asked suspiciously. I explained the limited access system that applied to the entire beach, but it did not answer her question. "I am surprised the townspeople agreed to such a rule," she said. "Who is forbidding them from going there?" The person we're about to meet, I guess." As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I regretted it. Kismel was a proud Dark Elf knight. Nanir was a refined lady with even more pride than the elf, and Kyo was a battle maid with absolute loyalty to her master. There was no way they'd all get along. It was a bad idea making Nanir look worse before they even had a chance to meet, but we couldn't just leave Kismel on her own outside the casino. Praying that we'd never have to see either Kismel or Kyo or both draw their weapons in a polite company, I said, well, shall we get going? It wasn't even noon yet, but Volupta Grand Casino had guests streaming in and out of the building. Fortunately, I didn't see any ALS or DKB members. Asuna sent Lytton a message to ask about them, and she replied that they held a late-night drinking session under the guise of a meeting for reflection after their massive loss at the arena. Both guilds were likely to resume activities after noon. Of course, they only lost in the sense that their 50,000 chips, 5 million coal, had all come from winning by following the cheat sheet. The actual loss from their assets was the original 11,000 coal they converted to chips. Of course, even that wasn't chump change, and if it happened to me, I'd be drinking too. Were Lind and Cabal planning on trying out the monster battle again today, or were they going to forget about the totally broken sword of Volupta and focus on beating the floor instead? I was hoping it was the latter, not because I was judging them, but because I knew that there was cheating and conspiracy afoot in the arena. The Korloy's probably cheating in some way in a majority of the 10 matches throughout the day, bilking their guests out of extra chips. The man who sold the ALS and the DKB that cheat sheet had to be an agent of the Korloy family too. Then again, that man was at the west gate of Lectio, the first town of the floor. To get the cheat sheet today, you'd have to walk all the way to Lectio and back. Lind and Cabal weren't going to do that, and I doubted they would jump into the arena without that betting information on hand. As I told Asuna this morning, I suspected the two were viewing that 11,000 as an expensive lesson learned, or at least I hope they did. We went into the Grand Casino. Argo showed off her pass and got us up to the 3rd floor, where we walked down the dimly lit hallway of Luxury Hotel and came to a stop in front of room 17. Like yesterday, Argo knocked on the door twice. From inside, Keo asked, "Who is it?" "It's Argo. Also my companions. My 3 assistants." "You found another one." "Don't worry. This one's much more capable than Kirito." I briefly took offense to that before conceding that it was definitely true. The lock clicked and the door swung open. Argo went in first, followed by Asuna, Kismel, then me. I checked the time. It was 11:30. We were 19 minutes ahead of the 1 o'clock deadline. Nanir gave us. That didn't mean she was going to pay us a bonus, and it was Argo who took the quest anyway. Asa and I weren't getting money, just the knowledge of how to find the snow tree buds. The spacious suite was just as dark as last night. Despite the midday hour, the windows were completely blocked with thick curtains, and only a few humble lamps, not a bonfire shroom, lit the room. The large sofa in the middle of the chamber was empty. I blinked with surprise, and Kyo addressed us with some contrition. "Lady Nirna is still asleep. She will be awake by noon. Will you have some tea and wait until then?" "Well, of course. It's our fault for coming early," said Argo. Kyo's eyes traveled past her and onto us, specifically Kismel, with her hood pulled low. The woman's sharp eyes narrowed. "Is it another adventurer?" "No." Kismel hesitated, then slowly pulled back her hood. The reaction was instantaneous. "Lysulian!" Kyo cried, placing a hand on her estoc. Kismel did not grab the hilt of her saber, but did pull her left foot back into a sideways stance. I took a quick step forward and asked, "What's a Lysulian?" Asuna whispered, "I think it's a person from Lysula." Seeing the logic in that, I promptly asked Kyo, "What do you call a person from KLO?" The battle maid, despite her stern expression, replied, "A Kilishan." "Oh." But why is there a Lychulan here? Why? Because she's with us? Amid the uproar, the door on the left wall opened, and a small figure came into the living room, slippers slapping against the floor. What is all this noise about? It was a yawning girl, with buoyant golden hair down past her waist, blindingly white skin, and brilliant eyes as red as gemstones. She held a large pillow with her left arm, and wore a black nightgown. Above her head was a three-dimensional question mark icon, the sign of a quest in progress. Ninir, head of the Nutch Toys, one of the two families who controlled Volupta Grand Casino, stopped in front of the empty 5-person sofa and faced us. She was the shortest of anyone here, but it felt like she was gazing down at us from a high. Kyo had been an instant away from drawing her estoc, but now she bowed in shame for the disturbance. She did not move away from her confrontational position with Kismel, however. And as for Kismel, what she did left my mouth hanging open with shock. I assumed she would merely watch Ninir in silence, but instead, she knelt on the carpet with one knee. She pressed her right hand to her chest and lowered her head deeply. I am Kismel, Knight of Lysula. Please forgive me for my disturbing your peace. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Asuna gape in surprise. Ninir did have a certain air to her that was unlike any girl I'd ever met, and she was the descendant of Falhari, the hero who founded Volupta. But at most she was a casino boss, not a noble or royalty. Yet the proud knight knelt to her in a show of great deference. She hadn't even done that for Viscount Eoflis. Ninir, however, just nodded as though this were perfectly ordinary. Don't worry, Kismel. You were helping Argo's group, weren't you? Then you are my guest as well. Please raise your head and have a seat. Bring tea, Kyo. Shouldn't I take her sword, my lady? Asked Kyo. The young master stifled a yawn and answered, No, you needn't bother. The Knights of Lysula wouldn't undertake an assassination. She dropped the pillow she was cradling onto the center of the 5-seat sofa, which already had plenty of cushions, and sat down right next to it. Kismel stood up again, so we moved over to the couches. Argo and I sat on the 3-person sofa across from her, while Kismel and Asuna sat on the big one. Kyo brought out cups for the table and poured us freshly made tea. I thanked her and took a sip. This was a different tea from yesterday, and smelled like citrus rather than grape. But it was just as tasty. But while it tasted good, what I really wanted was something to eat with it. From the early morning until now, the only thing I'd had was a nibble of an extremely shocking narcissus fruit. But I couldn't order a meal here, of course, and Asuna looked perfectly fine despite having eaten no more than me. So I tensed my gut and held my hunger in. This time, Ninir had tea instead of wine, probably because it was the middle of the day. After a short while, she had awakened enough to look at Argo and ask, So, did you gather what I asked of you? Of course! Should I take them out now? Not just yet, Kyo. 2 large bowls. Right away. Kyo went to the cabinet against the wall and took out 2 large silver bowls, which he placed on the table. Ninir held out a palm towards them. Argo and I shared a look, then opened our inventories. I materialized a large cloth sack, and Argo produced a small one, which we emptied into the bowls. Ninir first picked up one of the poisonous-looking narcissus fruits, started staring at it closely before putting it back. Next, she plucked up a wurtstone, examined it, and dropped it into the bowl. 20 ripe narcissus fruits, and 50 wurtstones, just as I asked. Well done. Kyo, the payment. The maid took out a small leather sack and handed it to Argo, who said, "A pleasure doing business," right as the question mark over Ninir's head vanished. But a split second later, another exclamation point appeared. The quest continued after this. Ninir took a sip of tea, then said, mostly to herself, "This will make the bleaching agent I need. The rusty Lycan will appear on the second match of the night, so there's plenty of time. The problem is, I suspect the Corloys may be wary their fur dyeing scheme has been discovered." "Even if they are, can they withdraw a monster that has already been registered for a competition?" asked not me, nor Asuna, nor Argo, but none other than Kismel. We'd given her a basic rundown of the situation on the way to the casino, but this was truly a remarkable level of understanding. I didn't want to believe it was just because she was an AI with all the answers available to her. Kismel, and all the high-functioning NPCs in SAO, thought for herself, questioned, wondered, and sometimes made mistakes in search of the best possible solution to any question. And Ninir, who probably had an AI just as advanced as Kismel, nodded and said, "That is correct. A beast once registered must appear in combat. In the long history of the Grand Casino, that rule has only been broken twice. Once was when the Corloy family servant forgot to give a creature its food, and their hold on the beast was broken before the match, requiring it to be exterminated. The other time was when a Notchtoy child snuck into the stables behind the casino and felt sorry for the creature, allowing it to escape. Both were very foolish mistakes." There was an undeniable scorn to her voice. Keo looked like she wanted to say something, but recovered and returned to her usual stoic look. Kismel continued, "Then whether the Corloy family is wary of or not, the plan to bleach the dye out of the Lycian's fur, I did not know the Knossos fruit could be used to do such a thing, should not be affected in any way." "It will not, I believe, but I would rather be thorough." Ninir looked at the girl next to me. "Argo, I doubt the Corloys are aware of you yet. Will you be willing to apply the bleach to the Lycan's fur as well?" Argo, non-committal answer, was probably because she was thinking of Asuna, Kismel, and me, and we had a very important mission of our own to worry about. But according to Kismel's expectation, the Dark Elf key retrieval team would not arrive until midday tomorrow. As a gambler who once bet everything at this monster arena, I wanted to find out the conclusion of this conspiracy. I gave her a look that said, "We're fine," so Argo nodded and turned to Ninir again. "Sure thing, we'll do it." "I am glad to hear it," Ninir said, smiling, as the icon over her head turned into a question mark. She swallowed the rest of her tea, then clapped her hands. "In that case, we must mix that bleaching solution. Keo, prepare the pot." We're doing it here?" I asked with surprise, which earned me a withering look from the maid. "Did you think we were going to make it in the casino kitchen, where the Corloys would know about it within 5 seconds?" Yeah, good point, of course." "As punishment for your foolish question, you are called upon to help Kirito." There wasn't a new quest log message, so that meant it wasn't an official quest, just a task. But at this point, I had no good reason to refuse. I'd be happy to." "Then you may start by squeezing the juice from the Narsos fruit." "Okay, but with what tool?" "You have perfectly fine tools at the end of your arms." Apparently, I was supposed to squeeze them by hand. I wasn't sure if that was really what they wanted, but I'd never seen any juicers or mixers in Aincrad. "The juice will go in here," said Keo, presenting me with a glass bowl. I picked up one of the Narsos fruit out of the silver bowl. Based on its pear-like texture, I suspected that if I squeezed it with all my strength, it would burst into chunks. So I held it over the glass bowl, adding pressure to my fingers bit by bit, until the light green lines running across the purplish red skin split, forcibly expelling a milky white juice over my fingers and into the bowl. A moment later, the spicy sweet scent wafted up, and I was remembering how nice the flavor it was, if not for the nasty electric shock sensation. Zap! My palm stung as though hit by supercharged static electricity, and I screamed and tossed the squeezed fruit. Ah! As I writhed, holding my hand in the air, Ninir flopped over onto her side and cackled with laughter. "Ah, you knew about this, Miss Near?" "The way you..." She kicked her legs uproariously and rolled back and forth. As I withstood the remnants of the shocking sensation, I saw Argo, Asana, and Kismel were also laughing. With a moment of horror, I looked up and saw even Keo had her back turned to me and was trembling. "It's fine," I told myself, "as long as everyone has a nice little moment of entertainment to blow off stress." Then I realized that there were still 19 Narsos fruit left to squeeze, and I exhaled heavily through my nose.